All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our...
Will the people in the back be able to hear us?
Can you guys hear us back there? No? Yes? No? I'll try to enunciate. So we're talking to you live at your home, and there's also a live audience here as well at the back of the room. So I'm going to talk a little bit louder than normal and enunciate so that people can hear me through this very fashionable mask. Today we have with us again a very wonderful pianist and composer and musician, George Colligan. And I think this is maybe the third or fourth interview we've done with you so far, yes?
So you'll have to, if I start saying the same things that I did in the last interviews, please tell me to change the subject.
No, not at all. Well, there's plenty of things that I would like to ask you about, just music stuff in general, and I'm sure we'll get into more historical stuff as well. But what I was going to ask you is now, as a father of two small children and a professor at Portland State University, prior to sheltering in place, because obviously we're not doing a whole lot of gigging, but when you were going out on the road and preparing to do like a tour with someone like Jack DeJohnette's band or Lenny White and Buster Williams, what's the workload like to prepare music and to be at that level and ready to play and just go and do that while juggling all these other responsibilities? Yeah,
well, and forgive me again if this covers territory that we already discussed, but I'm not able to practice the way that I did in the 90s. You know, early 90s, I just had gigs. I had graduated from school, and I just had tons of time to practice. So that doesn't really exist anymore. So I have to try to get to an instrument at least, you know, for short periods of time every day. So I sort of like steal moments, stolen moments, as it were. You know, if I can get 10 minutes on something here, you know, 20 minutes later, even 5 minutes, you know, that's something, you know, just at least maintain some kind of ability. But it's challenging because when obviously people who have children, you all know, that just takes up so much of your time, you know, and then teaching at a university. Although I would have to say that I'm lucky in the fact that, I mean, I think even compared to other universities, like the actual like class time is low. I know other people that teach at universities, and they say that, you know, they go to school 5 days a week. They're there, you know, day and night. And I'm fortunately not like that. I can do a lot of stuff at home, you know, because some of what I do is administrative. So that kind of stuff I kind of just do, you know, here and there as well, you know, when it needs to be done, you know, writing stuff on the computer and dealing with advising and stuff like that. And I think the fact that we have the technology makes that possible. I mean, if we would have to imagine if this pandemic happened 20, 30 years ago, it would be very different. Like the idea of working from home, I don't know if that was really would have worked at all. The ability to communicate was different, you know. So now that we have computers and email and texting and all that stuff, we're actually lucky that we can sort of adapt in that way. So, if I have something on the, like I'm just thinking of the past 10 years or 10, 11 years that I've been teaching full time and having kids and trying to juggle all that, you know, sometimes I have to save it until I get on the plane. You know what I mean? Like I literally don't have a moment to, if there's some music that I need to review or refresh, or if there's some new chart, like I'm just thinking like people that maybe I've never played with before, and there may be a whole set of music, you know. I mean, I'm a decent reader. I'm not the best, but for jazz, I think I'm okay. I can, you know, come into situations where maybe I don't know the music and adapt, whereas some people maybe don't feel comfortable doing that. I'm sort of used to that just from being in New York all those years. Like, I mean, I think back on some of the projects I did, and really hard music. And I mean, sometimes I would have the luxury of shedding. I mean, be able to practice the stuff for, weeks, even months. Sometimes that was really necessary. But I don't know. I would say in the past 10 years, like, I haven't necessarily had to do that level of preparation, but definitely playing, I mean, whatever it is, like, I might not get to actually thinking about the next music until I'm on the plane, or maybe even just at the sound check. You know what I mean? And that's, I mean, like this gig. You know what I mean? It's like, I have, my preparation was I put the music in my iPad. You know what I mean? And that was like, okay, I did something. And I looked at it for a second, but, if it's something that's really hard, like I'm supposed to do something on Halloween with a classical clarinetist, and she just sent me some music that's for like bass clarinet, piano, and voice. And she wants me to make a recording of it for the vocalist, and I looked at it, I was like, I actually have to practice this. In order to just do a recording, I can't, if I'm sight reading it, there's going to be a lot of clunkers, But I know how to prepare it, and I would have to kind of, again, like maybe get up early or maybe go to bed late or just try to find, time like that, So just in terms of how do you prepare, I mean, but on the other hand, when you get to my age, I think in some ways, like there's certain elements of music that are just there, you know what I mean? Like how to listen, how to play in time, how to keep the music going, you know what I mean? And so in a way, I've been preparing my whole life for any circumstance. So I sort of think that way, and it's like if I get there and maybe I don't feel 100% like I have every note of the music memorized and I have all facets of it. I could play, Stefan's song in every key. I'm just like, I think I can get through it, and it's going to feel good. That's the important. I think that's, and this is something I stress with my students. It's like, if you can make the music feel good, and that's a lot of that is a rhythmic thing, and you can also just keep it moving. Learn how to play with people, and keep going. Don't worry about the wrong notes. Just stay with the music. A lot of times people won't notice. They would rather you do that than, oh, you played every note right, but you're 5 measures behind, or it doesn't quite feel right, or it's not swinging, you know what I mean? So that's one thing that the more I do this, the more that is affirmed to me, that's important. So, and, just the whole idea of wrong notes is really, or like perfection in music. I don't think perfection in music, and again, if we've covered this, I'm sorry. But, so many, I mean, this is, again, not to knock classical musicians, but sometimes I sort of feel like bad for them because their whole view of whether a performance was successful was that they didn't play any wrong notes, or they didn't play that many wrong notes. And can you, I mean, like, and yet we're told in life that you will make mistakes, and what's important is how you learn from your mistakes. So in a way, the culture of classical music is so different from life. And so if you try to live your life that way, like, I will never make a life mistake, I will always speak correctly, I will always I'll always say the right thing, or you know what I mean? You can't, that's impossible. And if you try to think that way, you'll you'll drive yourself insane. I mean, I would think, So to be able to, I sort of wish that, we could take that away from classical music and just from music in general, I mean, and look, if you go into the studio and you play a wrong note, you can fix it. We have the technology to do that. So, like, when I go in the studio, I'm always just more about, let's get the vibe. We can always go back and fix little things here. And even sometimes it's cool to have something that's a little bit rough. You know what I mean? It means we're human. We're recording we're recording ourselves. We're human. We're not robots. You know, so that's how I. You know, I have more interesting stories.
So I'd like to go back to because I know that many of I've seen folks that are watching this. Some of them are professional musicians, and some have families and children and all that. And so when you talk about stealing away and trying to make that time, which is, as we all know, important as musicians, how do you prioritize things that you'd like to practice? I mean, how do you go about figuring out I need to work on this or I want to work on this, or how do you figure that out?
You mean just sort of in general?
Yeah.
Well, it's more organic now. I mean, I'm kind of always thinking about this stuff, so sometimes I'll write stuff down. I mean, I sort of have to, like, if I really feel overwhelmed about all the things that I have to do, and that may not just be practicing, but it might be, okay, I got to do this stuff for school, I got to do this stuff for, just keeping the lights on, I got to do stuff with my kids or whatever it is. Sometimes it's good to write it down, because then you can sort of let it out of your mind. You can say, okay, I'm storing this information here. I can kind of just think about other things. You know what I mean? I think that's why sometimes it's good to be able to not think about it. You know what I mean? Because that's why people have insomnia. And that's often why I have insomnia, because I'm like oftentimes if I'm on the road and we're playing certain tunes, and in jazz oftentimes these forms they're repetitive, so you're playing a tune, and so it can be good because let's say there's a form that you really like, and so it pops into your head, and then you're just sort of like soloing constantly in your head. You're just going through these permutations, like, oh, I could do this, I could do that. You're singing melodies. It's always there. But if you're trying to go to sleep, right. And you got to get up at 6 the next day, you're just like, oh, I wish I didn't have this tune in my head. You know what I mean? So, but a lot of the practice is mental, and you can do a lot away from your instrument. That can be cool for students because they might have to take a long bus ride to get to school or to get to work or whatever it is, and they can be thinking about this stuff. They could be listening, they could be trying to get it. I mean, just going through a form in your own mind can be as good as anything else. You know what I mean? In fact, when I was first starting to get into this music, and I wanted to practice more. I was still playing trumpet. I was sort of deciding what I was going to do, but I'd always find those opportunities to like do something productive in jazz. Like when I was doing my student teaching, I had to drive from downtown Baltimore to Dundalk, Maryland, and I didn't even have. My car was so cheap. I didn't have a cassette player. This is 1990. I didn't have a cassette player, so I just had like a boom box. I would put the boom box on the passenger seat and listen to, could be anything from Coltrane to, stuff I had taped off the radio to, I remember I listened a lot to this record called Out of the Blue, Live from Mount Fuji, which is sort of where Kenny Garrett got his stars. It was Kenny Garrett, Ralph Peterson, Ralph Bowen, Mike Mossman, Harry Pickens, and Kenny Davis. And it's like a live thing from Japan. It's a great record, but I just used to listen to that in the car and feel like, okay, I'm absorbing information, because that's it. When you start, you're like a kid in a candy store. You're like, I just want all these things. And so sometimes just listening, doing a lot of listening is better than anything. You know what I mean? Trying to absorb the music. So but now it's sort of, I try to do it as I go, and sometimes it's maybe even subconscious, but and then there's also just the idea of maybe not worrying so much about whether I'm improving or whether even because a lot of that, and I understand that, is about, because it's not only you want to achieve and you want to get better, you want to be a good player, but it's about people's perception of you. And so as you get older, I mean, and you don't care about that as much. I mean, you can still be conscious of it, but you're able to compartmentalize it a little bit easier, you know. So that has helped a lot, I think, in my own musical development. Just more first coming at it from like whether I'm satisfied with my own music, you know. And yeah, of course you want people to like what you do, but you might be on the, you know, the cusp of some musical breakthrough. You know, you might be playing at your highest level yet, and there's still going to be people who be like, that's not really my thing, or like, he doesn't sound good. You know what I mean? Yeah. As my 5-year-old, he must have gotten this from some TV show. He's like, everybody's a critic. Just keeps saying that, you know. So yeah, in terms of how I work on stuff, I mean, there's always stuff to work on. You're never really done, you know. But I think you have to put it in a better perspective, you know, to see the difference between short-term development and long-term development. Like, you know, I and some of that might just be your own perception of it. You know, in some ways, I feel like, okay, I'm still desiring to make music. And I'm still, you know, practicing here and there. I'm still playing, you know, even in the pandemic. And you know, I still have a lot of musical goals. But, you know, on the other hand, every once in a while somebody sends me a tape that they put on their computer from, like, the 90s. You know, oh, here's this jam that we did in 1993. And I'm like, oh, let's listen to what I sound like at age 23. I'm like, kind of sound the same. You know, maybe just more notes, you know, more like too many notes, but it's kind of the same thing. And that's something that Carl Allen, who's a great drummer, educator, you know, he's band leader. I used to play in his band, and he hired me at Juilliard, where I taught adjunct for 2 years. But he said, you know, most musicians kind of sound like they're going to sound in their 20s. You know, it might change a little bit, but if, like, you think about the great players, it's like, how different were they from age 20, 25 to age 40, 45? You know what I mean? It's rare to have somebody who sounds completely different.
Well, you got someone like for example, like Dexter Gordon. You listen to early Dexter Gordon and then late Dexter Gordon, or like Sonny Rollins, right? Same early Sonny Rollins, late Sonny Rollins, or early Miles Davis and then, you know, late Miles Davis. There's some where there's like a vast change, you know. Yeah, anyways.
But also, you know, you have to wonder how gradual that was. Was it like they just woke up one day and were like, I'm going to do this differently? You know what I mean? And in a way, you know, you could debate this about Miles Davis, and I know people who played in his band, and they said that, they're like, yeah, Miles kind of always played the same stuff. I mean, yeah, his early stuff as a bebopper, like he kind of sounds like a kid. But I would say from the 50s on, you know, you always know it's Miles. You know what I mean? Even in the 80s, you know, early 90s, you know it's him. It always kind of has that thing, and even you could say, like, you know, a record like Bitches Brew or Silent Way, and compared to, you know, the Plug Nickel or go back to Relaxin' or whatever. You know, all those, you know, cooking with Miles Davis Quintet. There's a sameness to it, which I think is fascinating to watch his artistic development. It's like he had his concept, but what he did that was really cool was he changed stuff around him, and he really thought about, like, how others could make him sound good. You know what I mean? And so he hired people who were great and sort of just let them. He was like, it's like, you know, he hired Herbie like he's going to tell Herbie Hancock, like, no, play this voice. You know what I mean? Like, you know, you try to use your third finger. You know what I mean? He can't. He hired people that were already great and sort of gave them a forum, and that made him sound good. And he took the credit, obviously. But that was, I think, a genius on his part to you know, in terms of being a band leader, you know. So I know we went on a bunch of tangents, but anyway, So I don't know. I just think that music is, you should be viewed as life. It's a process, and the mistakes are part of the process, and you can't get too hung up on just one gig or one mistake or one thing. It's very easy to, you know what I mean? Like people who, I remember doing a tour in '98 with a great tenor player, but he would just let one wrong note destroy him. He was a great, we did, I think it was 8 weeks of work, which is now really rare, but we went all over Europe. We went to Africa. We went to Angola. We went to Portugal. We went to France. But we really developed. It's a shame we didn't get to do more in that band. But he would get really. He would just let one wrong thing just bring him down, as opposed to just, instead of seeing everything, and you know what I mean. Like if you like. And I get it. People get upset about things and really push it over the border of being reasonable. But it's like if you make some kind of, if you're talking to somebody, you make a grammatical mistake or something, or you forget somebody's name or whatever, you don't just be like, oh man, I'm the worst person in the world, I should just give up. My whole day is ruined. You know what I mean? You just kind of like, oh, I'm sorry, or like you like kind of trip on over your shoelace or something. You know what I mean? You're just not like, oh my God, I'm the worst. You hopefully don't do that. So, and in music, I think it's this, and that's I don't want to say that jazz is about wrong notes, because that creates a misconception, and unfortunately we have this dynamic where classical, and really when people say classical, it means European music of the 17th and 18th century, and we have jazz, which people don't even know what it is. Oftentimes they're like, oh, Kenny G or Spyro Gyra, you know what I mean? Sade. Man, I love jazz. I listen to Sade. And all those people are great, but it's this sort of like, well, what is jazz? And it's like, oh, it's, when I was at Peabody, we tried to have our own jazz group, and there was no jazz program. There was a jazz band that was run by, I think he was maybe kind of a classical saxophone player, but also did jazz. He also drank a lot. So he wasn't really, I think they kind of hired him on purpose. They're like, well, we don't really want a jazz program to flourish, but we'll have it. So we'll hire somebody kind of lame. And he was lame, but there were some really eager people in it who wanted to learn how to play. And there was a history class taught by Martin Williams. Maybe it was towards the end of his life. Other than that, there was no, jazz was, even at Peabody, even like Debussy was considered really like, oh, this is some wild, wacky stuff, So we tried to have our own thing called the Peabody Underground, and we actually performed on a Thursday noon concert. And I remember somebody, a classical musician came up to me afterwards like, wow, jazz is so cool. You can just play wrong notes and it doesn't matter. And I'm like, well, if this is the only thing you got from our performance, then that's weird. You know what I mean? So, but I think, unfortunately, this is how classical musicians think. And so, and also, some of it, too, is about whether people are actually listening. Like, one thing I say often is that the problem with jazz is you actually have to listen to it. You know what I mean? Like, but sometimes people don't, so they don't really understand, so they come up with a preconception based on things that they've read or things that they've heard, and just use your ears. Like, try to, it's all about what goes in your ear, So, anyway, there's just a lot of misconceptions about it, and I think that we're just, because she wasn't wrong. because it's true. But from a different way of thinking about it. It's you know, we can play wrong notes and it doesn't matter, but that's actually great because we're not just obsessed with perfection. To me, it's an unhealthy obsession with perfection. You know what I mean? Because anytime you want to view music that way, you know, then let's take a Hank Mobley solo. I mean, a Hank Mobley solo, you know, Hank Mobley was one of the greatest tenor players ever. You know what I mean? He's an important part of the history, you know. You listen to him play, and you just listen to it for what it is. You're like, it's unbelievable. But if you really wanted to, like, sit there and talk about, well, you know, this note maybe, you know, you need to quantize it, you know what I mean? And you know, maybe he missed this articulation or whatever. And it's like, well, you're totally missing the point. You know what I mean? So, and that's, to me, unfortunately, I would love to figure out a way that the classical musicians could let that aspect of what they do, they could just let it go. They'd probably be happier in their lives, you know? And I mean, and then I might want to play more classical music, you know what I mean? Because I wouldn't feel like somebody was judging me, you know? And what does Bach care? Bach's been dead for, what, 400 years? He doesn't care. I mean, so that's the thing. I mean, it's so what we're fortunate is to be able to play music in a way that's more like life. You know what I mean? It's more accepting. It's more organic. It's more real. It's more in the moment. So I don't even and then to go beyond that, it's like you learn from a mistake. You think about the things that you've done, you know, anybody has done, and that was like, man, that I really like. I mean, you know, all the life events that where some life goes wrong in a really big way, you know. And if you can learn, sometimes those are the best lessons. You know what I mean? So, I mean, if you lock your keys in your car, let's say something really mundane, that might be, okay, I learned for the next time I'm not going to do that again. I mean, I could go down the list. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. It's like, you know, those types of mistakes, which are big and they're terrible, but you learn for the next time. I've learned so many because I was in a situation where I was allowed to make mistakes, or at least it was a given that mistakes were going to happen. Like, I've learned more from those huge mistakes than people who go through music school and take lessons and all that stuff, and they never actually they're never fortunate enough to get to make those mistakes. You know what I mean? You have those mistakes where it's like it's a figurative, not literal, but a figurative slap in the face. I've never been slapped in the face, as far as I can remember, for musical reasons, literally, but figuratively, I have been, you know, just beaten, figuratively beaten to a pulp, because, you know, I was not as experienced. So from those experiences, it has made me see music so differently, and to have an awareness. I mean, and again, did I tell the Ernestine Anderson story?
I don't know that you did.
Okay. Ernestine Anderson, in fact, she's kind of from the Seattle area, I think. Yeah. Incredible vocalist. I think she passed, though, right? Yeah. So, but when I worked with her, I was probably 22 or 23, and she was 65. The bass player was Keeter Betts, who was also 65. The drummer was a guy named Harold Mann, who was 65. I was a last-minute sub for a pianist who will remain nameless, who is also passed on. I got a lot of gigs from him not showing up, so that's just you know, great luck for me. But so I get a call like 5 o'clock on a Friday from Keeter Betts. And he says, this pianist didn't show up, and we have 3 nights at Blues Alley. This is Washington, D.C. He says, do you have a tuxedo? I said, yes, I do. He said, come down, and we need you to play with Ernestine Anderson. I was like, okay, cool. So I go down, and, Ernestine is kind of, old school swinging, and I had a feeling for basically comping for singers, but I was also trying to play some modern stuff and be super slick. So we have a little rehearsal, and then we play the first set, and I'm just trying to make sense of it all, And after the first set, Keeter comes up. He says, "Hey man, don't be playing that Chick Corea stuff." And I was like, he's like, just play block chords. Just play some nice chords, play some blues, And I said, okay, cool, I will, And I was trying to be in the pocket with that. So then the second night, it's maybe second set or whatever. And again, everybody on the bandstand is older, but oftentimes the hierarchy in a band with vocals, piano, bass, and drums is. I don't know if this is the right analogy, but it's like the vocalist is the commander-in-chief, but the pianist is like the general. You know what I mean? So it's like that's a position of command, but you're taking orders from, and you're trying to interpret the orders. Yeah. So, and as a 23-year-old, I'm like feeling like this is weird. Like everyone here is so much older than me and more experienced. Like I don't feel super comfortable with that. I'm just trying to get my bearings. I'm trying, read these charts, which were a mess. And so anyway, at one point we're doing this tune. It could have been something like Teach Me Tonight, and it's kind of like here, and so she gets the turnaround at the end, and we're just vamping, and I'm doing a turnaround. And I guess it wasn't quite the turnaround that she wanted. So she says, she kind of looks at me and she says, turnaround. And I'm like, I am turning around. I'm doing the turnaround. And she's kind of trying to do her thing, but it's like, and I'm trying to just, because a lot of communication on the bandstand is like sort of osmosis / mind reading. It's not necessarily verbal. It's not do this, do that. It's written in the chart. It's not. It's all vibes. And I'm not getting the right vibe. We're not communicating. But she keeps saying, turn around. So, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And I kind of panicked. And something made me say, let's abort. Let's just take it out. Let's just end this song. And sometimes you just got to go on instinct. So you're right here, and then I get to, and I'm like, do, ba do, 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 but in that 2-second, 3-second space there that I just sang, when that happened, the message went to the bass player and the drummer kind of halfway through that, but maybe a third of the way through that, Ernestine Anderson starts screaming at me on the microphone. She's just like, no, no. And so the problem is that the delayed reaction, so I was like, what? And meanwhile, that message got to the drummer, and he's just taking it out. And she's still screaming like, no, no, don't finish the song until I'm finished what I got to say. And I was like, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. And so I'd go back to the turnaround, don't, And meanwhile, the drummer had ended. He had done a big roll. And then he's like, what's going on? And so then he kind of goes back, and it's just really lame, super lame. And we kind of went back into the groove. And meanwhile, I was sweating so much that my tuxedo was just soaked at that point, And everyone's laughing. Everyone in the club, packed house, everyone's laughing at me because I completely screwed up. And again, it was like a figurative slap in the face. I was just like, whoa. And so the main thing that I took from that was that, as a kid or as somebody who hasn't yet figured out that this is your life, you know what I mean, or you haven't been around like the heaviest of the heavy cats, you realize how seriously people take this music. You know what I mean? It's like performing. To be a performer on a high level is not a joke. You know what I mean? It's like you need to, at the very least, you need to really be paying attention to the point where you should be reading each other's minds, you know? And so, I mean, I'll never forget that lesson. And I had other similar lessons. It's just like, and I mean, and again, and I think because oftentimes we kind of go the other way with jazz. We're like, oh, it's cool, whatever. We can just kind of, you know, be super loose and, you know, and just because the music is loose doesn't mean that we're not giving it, you know, all of our energy. You know what I mean? It's like when that time on the stage playing together, like we need to be paying attention to each other. So that was like, okay, these people take this seriously. You know what I mean? And Ernestine Anderson, the reason she's so great is because she takes it really seriously. You know what I mean? And it made me pay attention, not just to myself, because that's the thing. You can get into a thing where you're just listening to yourself and you're like, and again, this relates to life too, because you're just like, is what I'm doing okay? Is what I'm doing okay? And like, let me listen to my Chick Corea licks and see whether that's cool. And meanwhile, there's all this other stuff going on in the bandstand that you need to pay attention to. Like, you cannot play jazz with blinders on. You know what I mean?
You made your move too soon? Is that what you said?
Yeah, good one. That was, it could have been that song too. I don't remember, but that was kind of her hit, you know. So things like that where it was like, oh, okay. And that's the kind of stuff you can't get in the practice room. And we have a hard time getting that now with COVID, because it's harder to play together. But that's the more like practical, realistic, you know, what I call, and I think I mentioned this before, like doing it for real. You know what I mean? Like having it be relevant. Like it's great to write dissertations or write about the music or read about the music or listen to it and talk about stuff, but actually playing it. And, you know, you can talk all you want about 2-5-1s and harmonic concepts and what have you, but to me, there is that, you know, it's in the moment, you know what I mean? And nothing else matters, you know what I mean? It's like there's no present, there's no future, there's just the now. That's what I love about playing this music, is that it really is about the now. It's about this sacred moment. I mean, and you look at all the stuff that we go through to try to play this music. You know what I mean? It's like, I mean, like we were talking about the traveling. Like if I wasn't addicted to the feeling that I get when I play with people, do you think I'd be trying to get on those planes? I mean, you know, trying to, like, you know, argue with Delta about, you know, my flight or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, man, I would never travel.
Well, I wanted to ask you, we're getting close. We got about maybe 20 minutes left. And then we're going to, for those of you listening at home, we're going to take a short break and then set up and get ready to do the concert as well. We'll stream from the same channel. But I wanted to ask you, you mentioned, you know, here you are, George Colligan in 2020. You've had all these experiences, and you've mentioned, you know, been lucky enough to get those types of musical beatings, for lack of a better term, that other people will never have those experiences. So what besides the one you just mentioned with Ernestine Anderson, like when you're working with students and trying to impart like some of these things that they may never have the opportunity to experience, what are some of the like pivotal things that you really like that moment where you really took something away that you can bring forward and help make yourself a better musician? And how do you impart that to students?
Oh, how do I tell? Well, besides telling the story. Well, one of the key things I think about the difference between, you know, just having a class or having it all be sort of academic is, again, relating it to the relevant to the bandstand. So I've hired my students, and I used to play a lot more with the students. And, Hal Galper sort of backs me up on this. He was saying, like, a lot of it is sort of nonverbal teaching. It's nonverbal communication. Play together and learn through playing rather than, like, okay, we're going to talk about 2/5. You know what I mean? Like, because sometimes you really have to do it to feel it, you learn it in the moment, and again, like, it's sort of, in a way, it's like throwing people in the deep end of the pool. I mean, I would never do that with my sons. In fact, we were
other
like
people's children, right?
Yeah, just other people's. It's like, even with my sons, it's like he's already taken like 2 summers of swimming lessons, and we're like, oh, he's not ready, Meanwhile, we brought both of them over to some people's house that had a pool, and they're both actually swimming just fine. I mean, the little one wears a vest, but he probably doesn't need it at this point. And I don't think he had any lessons. You know what I mean? So in a way, if you can kind of find the happy medium. Anyway, but I digress. So, but with my ensembles at school, I mean, some people really have a hard time with this because they've been so, the word is coddled. They've been like, and a lot of high school programs, they think about things this way. They're like, okay, we have a competition in February, so we're going to pick music, which means 3 or 4 tunes. We're going to play those pieces, which is mostly written arrangements. This is like for your high school big band. We're going to play those written arrangements every day for the next, 4 or 5 months until it's perfect. Then we're going to go to the competition, and we're going to win or not win, and then we're done. And so that's, forgive me, but that's horrendous. I think if I had to do that, if I had to teach that way, or if I had to be in one of those ensembles, I think I would just quit. Playing the same music every day and to try to perfect it in a way that it's not even perfect. It's like, probably those classes would be better served if they just sat around and listened to records or just tried to play a blues. That's the thing. All these high school students, and I know that there are some great programs here. There's Garfield, there's Roosevelt, and I've heard some of those bands. They're amazing. However, you got to wonder how many times do they play those arrangements, and they're just like, because you could be in one of those bands. You'd be like, yeah, we won the Essentially Ellington, great. It's like, well, can you play a blues? No. But I was in the band. I'm like, well, then what did you even learn? Do you even know a Duke Ellington tune? Can you even, you know what I mean? So this is the thing. It's like, what is the priority? To make better musicians or just to win some dumb competition, No,
we could certainly go on all day, and these interviews always go way too fast, but I want to give some of our listeners and live audience, if anyone has any questions for George at this time, either let us know via message on the Facebook feed or in person. Are there any questions for George at this time about anything in his sordid past?
or my
any
future?
Questions?
You got any questions for my future?
If not, well, we'll give it a couple minutes for the questions to come in, but we can keep talking here. So with your students,
no questions are coming in.
Are there any questions? No, not yet. So with your students at Portland State, what are some of the things? It sounds like you do a heavy focus on performing, and you'll actually work with them in clubs, go and take them into clubs to perform.
Yeah, we try to do that. When I first got to Portland State, there were a bunch of students that I really tried to bring out into the real world, and there were kind of more gigs happening. So I would hire them, or we would just try to find whatever place we could play, and I played with them oftentimes. But I think I was sort of alluding to that, some of the students really saw that as a great opportunity, and they really kind of were like, it was completely eye-opening for them. So every time we played, they would learn something. They would really take some of that home with them. And I in a way, I gave them a forum to try stuff, and also to just expose them to different ways of thinking about music in the moment, and try to sort of take them outside their comfort zone. So some really thrived, and a few went on to, become already really precocious, great musicians. One is a saxophone player named Nicole Glover, And in a way she was already really good, but I would hire her for gigs, and I sort of feel like I mentored her. I had her on some recordings, and some people around Portland were like, I can't even believe, why are you even hiring this kid? You know what I mean? Like, there's other great players. I was like, well, this is how the music really works. You know what I mean? It's that mentor-mentee relationship, All the cats that went through Art Blakey's band, all the cats that went through Miles's band, Betty Carter, Horace Silver, you know what I mean? It's like you play with people. That's your school. You know what I mean? The school of Art Blakey, that's a doctorate right there. You know what I mean? You really learn some stuff. So, not that I'm saying I'm equal to that, but but in my small way, I'm like, get on the bandstand, let's play. Here's some tunes, here's some of my tunes. You know what I mean? Figure it out. Some of them really did, and then some of them did not. And again, it's that mentality of like, well, I want to have 6 rehearsals, and like I was like, well, I really want to get comfortable with this. I'm like, well, it's almost like getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. I mean, that's really something. That's a great lesson, because if you're comfortable with being uncomfortable, then nothing will faze you. You know what I mean? So, I mean, just all the different situations I've been in. I think if I was like, wait, I need a minute. The train already leaves the station. You know what I'm saying? And it's interesting too, because I mean, I know people who sort of like missed opportunities because they were afraid or they hesitated. And so if you just embrace the opportunity, then you just learn how to sort of be ready.
Coping skills, basically.
Coping skills. There's a pianist in Baltimore who was like my idol, and everybody talked about how he almost played with Art Blakey. He was in New York playing at the Star Cafe, and Lonnie Plaxico. This is I've heard the story from different people, but Lonnie Plaxico came up to him and was like, "Hey, Art Blakey needs a pianist. We're going to Toronto tonight. Do you want to do it?" And Bob was like, well, I won't say his name, but it was one of my favorite pianists in Baltimore, but sort of like he could have had that opportunity, and he was just like, oh, he's like, can I finish this tune? Like it was while he was playing, he was like, can I finish the tune first? And Lonnie was like, I don't know, and because I guess they were out in the car, they were waiting in the car, and so he finished the tune, he went out, and they had split. That was his missed opportunity. You know what I mean? So.
Well, speaking of missed opportunities, there is. It sounds like a question. We have a question. What is the question? The question is, what is your typical practice session like? And we kind of covered that a little earlier, but go ahead.
Well, I do 20 minutes of cardio, and then I do then I meditate. No, just, it's hard to say. I mean, I would say generally, like, if I'm practicing, it's probably with some specific musical purpose. Like, if I have a performance, I'm practicing that music. So I don't really have much chance to just practice, sit down and say, I'm going to work on this. You know what I mean? I'll have to do it sort of as I go.
You did mention earlier in one of the other interviews about having limited time, particularly as we all get older and more responsibilities. Time is fewer and fewer opportunities to practice. And so you said, practice as much as you can while you're young, but you also mentioned, you talked about students about high intensity practicing. Maybe you can speak about that.
Yeah, well, again, it's just sort of, if you're going to have really, really, like, there is kind of a difference between playing and practicing, and I think that the practicing should probably be viewed as something really specific and probably alone. And so, but in order to concentrate that heavily, you can't do that for 5 hours. I mean, and not to say it's like lifting weights, but it's like, like, for example, if anybody has ever done the, if you read Men's Health or whatever, and maybe, all genders of people do this type of lifting, but you do what's called the 5x5, which is you do heavy, like kind of the heaviest weight. You can do 5 reps, 5 sets, right? You can't lift heavy more than that, because that actually takes concentration, and you'll drop the weight on your foot or on your body. You know what I mean? So you have to really be focused. You can't just kind of be half focused. So if you're going to have total concentration, I say do it in short bursts. You know what I mean? So that you're focused, and then clear your mind, go do something else. If you do really good practice for 10 minutes, you're going to feel like you did something. You know what I mean? Like, if you're just kind of, playing through music you like, that's not the same. It's not that it's not useful, but it's like, for example, one of the things that has kept me, playing decently up until this age is I learned piano technique from somebody that studied with somebody named Dorothy Taubman, and it's called the Taubman technique, and it's a specific way of dealing with the physical act of playing the piano. So if I'm practicing trying to think about that, I only want to do that for short amounts of time. If I'm really specific, it deals with choreography, and making sure that you're playing as efficiently as possible. If I'm doing it, or if I have another student doing it, I don't want that to be all day long, because then you start to get sloppy and you lose your focus. And you start thinking about the music, and this is a very specific physical thing. And I think all instruments have that. If you're, bass players working on their left hand intonation, you know what I mean? It's like they don't want to just kind of be half whatting it. So.
Well, before I forget too, and I should have mentioned this earlier, and I think maybe I did in one of the other interviews that we did. Aside from teaching at Portland State, you also teach privately, so people can study with you if they want. Correct?
Sure.
And how do they go about doing that?
They could email me or text. I'm not giving out my number right now.
Right.
But you could go to my Facebook and send me a private message, or they can go to Portland State and find my email.
This is your website. It's also on.
It's on my website too, which is just myname.com. And I now with COVID, I have more online students than I've ever had. I sort of put out feelers for doing Skype lessons like 10 years ago, and maybe about 10 years ago, I was like, I've done some Skype lessons, and it didn't really. I got too busy, but now. I think because people are isolated, and because people are becoming more accustomed to the Zoom format or Skype. You know who Ari Honig is? Yes. I'm giving him Skype lessons on piano, which is really kind of a trip. But so I have him, a student in New York. I have a student in Chicago. I have a student in L.A. I have a student in the Midwest. All over. I had a couple lessons from Berlin. From Japan.
Remember, I think it was last October or November, we had you up here to do a concert, and we had gotten somebody, and we were talking about online lessons. You're like, I need to start doing more. I'm like, yeah, you'd be great. No, you have to.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, for sure.
So, we've got about 5 minutes left. Are there any other questions that have come in? No other questions? Any questions from our live studio audience? No? All right. Well, I think what I'm going to end up doing is just wrapping it up here. And the reason I'm saying that is we have a very small window to turn around and get the performance stuff set up, because we're going to start the concert here at 3 o'clock. So, again, George, thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, yeah.
Yeah. And thank you to our viewers. So we're going to take a very short break here, and then we're going to get ready to play a set of brand new, all original compositions for you. So we hope you enjoy the music and tune in, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.